Here is a sample lesson of a gentleman that I worked with. This is our first lesson together, and made some tremendous progress. When he first came to me, he said, he had some issues with ball flight, tended to hit blocks to the right, kind of scooping hooks left. Golf balls tended to go too high. His impact was more behind the golf ball, not actually fat, but definitely more behind the golf ball, and occasionally catch it very thin. And so we kind of sat down and discussed his before. And on the left here, you can see that I talked to him about how he had a problem that was more of a good putter's mistake, not a bad putter's mistake. Club definitely works to the inside too much, too flat, and below the plane. And so at this point, the shaft is pretty much horizontal. And he really can't keep it on that angle and turn, because if he did, it would go around his waist or around his thigh. So he had to actually lift it up. The interesting thing was, though, is they did keep on turning. Left arm kind of got very low. So at this point, the left arm, I think, is a little flat, a little behind him, which tended to get the club to go steep at the top. So it was a good move for him in terms of getting his left arm to get flatter and go more behind him, because he could get the club more up, but now the shaft's gotten too steep. So he's gone from being pretty flat to being definitely steep, and what I call inverted. It's actually on the other side of vertical. This would be vertical, and then it kept on going more inverted on the other side of vertical. But again, I think he had to do that because the club was too flat at the beginning. And so on the way down, when he found a way to find the back of the golf ball, is he would simply reroute it back to the same way it went back. So it comes down, again, more from the inside. Again, it's gotten back to being very flat. And so at impact, he would tend to hit either behind the golf ball, again, not fat, just behind, or catch the golf ball a little bit more on the upswing at the right moment and catch it very thin. So I told him, I said, I bet you're a pretty good driver of the golf ball. And he said, yeah, I am. Well, the reason why is because that'd be a pretty good motion for a driver. He's catching the golf ball more on the upswing, which is what you want to do with the driver anyway. And so he drove it pretty well. Didn't hit it terribly far, but drove it pretty well as far as in the right directions. So we talked about that, and I says, what we need to do here is get the club to travel on a little better path. Because if I back up here one more time, you can see in his golf swing with his body relative to those lines around his head on the bill of his cap, he would tend to go back, pretty much stay there on the way back, but on the way down, because it's coming from inside, he'd have to back up and get away from that line. So his head goes up, and his head goes back away from the line there. So he had to do that because the club came from the inside. So I think a lot of times the path of the golf club, the body will accommodate what that club's doing. So we set off to make some changes here, and what I want to do was give him 2 or 3 things that would really help him make better impact with the golf ball. I didn't want to clutter his mind with a lot of information. I wanted to help him understand there's 2 or 3 things here that are very important. One, I think, is his posture. Not a lot of room here between his arms and his body at this point. I want to give him some more room so he can swing the golf club more up on that plane and not go so far to the inside. So we worked on his posture, got him to bend a little more from his hips, back out a little straighter, and he's got more room between his arms and his body now, so he can get that club to travel back a lot better in his backswing. So that's kind of the first thing we talked about, got the posture better. We made a little bit of adjustment in his grip, where he got his heel pad of his left hand more on top of the golf club, which will allow him to hinge or cock his wrist better in his backswing. So on the way back, even though the club still goes a little bit to the inside, it's definitely much more up on the plane at that point, whereas before over here, very much inside. So I think his wrist on the one on the left is doing more bending, whereas the one on the right is doing more cocking of his wrist. Club can get more up on the plane at that point, at that same point before, still too flat, too much to the inside. from here he keep on turning, and now his left arm kind of covers his right shoulder, and left arm is much more upright, not so far behind him here as before. The real change there is the shaft, though. The shaft now is not nearly as steep as it once was at the top. I think it's still a little upright, but again, can't fix a ton of stuff in the first lesson. I wanted to fix the important stuff, and that's definitely better than it is over here. So we talked about that, and I said, the reason why you hit behind the golf ball or catch it very thin at times and block it out to the right and scoop it is because of your downswing. But to fix his downswing, I had to help him understand how to fix his backswing and get it more closer to being on plane. And so I said, what I need to do is get more on top of the plane on the way down and not come so much from the inside. So I basically told him, I said, I want you to feel like you're actually going to come over the top of it. And you can see this board I've got on the ground that's kind of angled off to the left. And I said, what I want you to do is to kind of match that path of that board. And so he said, so Brad, you want me to come over top of it? I said, well, I want you to maybe feel like you're coming over top of it, but I don't think there's any chance you'll do it. But try. And so on the way down, the club got more on top of the plane versus coming so much underneath it. And so his impact was more at the golf ball versus being behind the golf ball, catching the golf ball on the upswing. So he compressed the golf ball a lot better, made better contact with the golf ball, so he found ball than turf. Club stayed more on that line on the way through versus it coming very much above the line on the way through. But look very closely at what his head has done now. Instead of backing out of it, he actually stayed more on top of the plane on the way down, and his head, as a result, stayed where it needed to stay versus backing up. No gap here. Big gap here. Heads come above the plane here. The line. Did I draw his head and address? Over here. Didn't. Stayed where it should stay. So I think by fixing what the club did, his body tended to accommodate what the club did, and so it stayed more in his posture on the way through. So the big things we worked on was more of things that were what I called the real issue, the cause of the problem. 1, posture. 2, grip. And then the third one was because his posture was better and his grip was better, he could get it more up on the plane. On the way down, I had him feel like he's more on top of the plane on the way down. To him, it felt like he was coming on top of it, but it allowed him to make better impact with the golf ball. So it depends on who's in front of me as far as the information I give them, but I'm not going to give them 50 things. I want to fix 2 or 3 things that are really the issues, and those 2 or 3 things fix maybe 30 others. So he made tremendous progress in our first lesson. Much better impact with the golf ball, much more solid. He hit it further, the golf ball went lower, and all those things came from basically working on the causes of the problem. A little bit of posture, his grip, and then giving the feeling all the way down where he's going to come more over the top of the plane, more on top of it, help him find better impacts. There's other things we want to work on from here, but this first lesson, great progress. He was very excited and very happy, very surprised by how we fixed his golf swing. And so we got his swing to stay more on plane.